In this video, we'll study about the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the lower elongated part of the central nervous system. So this is the spinal cord. It is the lower elongated part of the central nervous system. It is cylindrical in shape and it is slightly flattened anteroposteriorly and occupies the upper 2/3 of the vertebral canal. The spinal cord measures about 45 cm or 18 inches in adult male and 42 cm in adult female, and it weighs about 30 gram. It extends as the downward continuation of the medulla oblongata. So this is the medulla oblongata. It extends as the downward continuation of the medulla oblongata from the upper border of the posterior arch of the first cervical vertebra. From the upper border of the posterior arch of the first cervical vertebra to the lower border of the first lumbar vertebra from C1 to L1. Its lower tapering end is known as the conus medullaris. So this is the conus medullaris. The apex of the conus medullaris continues down as a thin thread-like filament that is known as the filum terminale. So this is the filum terminale. The spinal cord provides attachment to 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Through this 31 pairs of spinal nerves, the spinal cord is connected to the tissues of trunk, girdles, limb and the viscera. The spinal cord contains a large number of ascending and descending pathways which serves as a conduit for nerve information passing to and fro from different parts of the body and the brain. When you see the function of the spinal cord, it helps in the execution of simple reflexes and transmission of impulses to and from the brain. Next we'll see about the positional changes of the spinal cord. Up to 3rd month of the intrauterine development, the spinal cord extends through the entire length of the vertebral canal and the spinal nerve emerges through the intervertebral foramen at the level of the origin. Thereafter, the vertebral canal grows faster than the spinal cord and the terminal end of the spinal cord gradually shifts to a higher level. When you see at birth, the spinal cord ends at the level of L3 vertebra, while in adult it terminates at the level of lower border of L1 or the disc between L1 and L2. The knowledge of these variations in the vertebral level of the lower end of the cord is important to avoid injury to the cord while performing lumbar puncture, especially in children. Next we'll see about the spinal meninges. The spinal cord is surrounded by 3 protective layers that are known as the spinal meninges. From outside inward, these are the dura mater, the arachnoid mater and pia mater. First we will see about the dura mater. The spinal dura extends from the foramen magnum to the lower border of second sacral vertebra. The space between the spinal dura and the vertebral canal is known as the epidural space. So this is the epidural space. In this space contains loose areolar tissue, semi-liquid fat and internal vertebral plexus. The space between the dura and the arachnoid mater is known as the subdural space. It contains capillary layer of fluid. Next we'll see about the differences between the spinal and the cranial dura mater. The spinal dura mater is single layer and consists of meningeal layer only, whereas the cranial dura mater is a double layer and consists of inner meningeal layer and outer endosteal layer. The cranial dura mater, they form the folds, the falx cerebri, falx cerebelli, tentorium cerebelli and diaphragma sella. The spinal dura mater does not form any folds. In the spinal dura, you can see the epidural space, which is a space between the spinal dura mater and the vertebral canal. In the cranial dura, you do not have the epidural space. Next, we'll see about the arachnoid mater. The arachnoid mater is a thin, delicate, transparent avascular membrane which invests the spinal cord loosely. Above, it is continuous with the arachnoid mater of the brain, and below it extends up to the lower border of the second sacral vertebra. So in this picture, you can see this is the outer layer, that is the dura mater. After reflecting the dura mater, what you are seeing is the arachnoid mater, and deep to the arachnoid mater, you get the pia mater. So the level of termination of the dural sheath, the dura mater and the arachnoid mater, is at the level of the lower border of the second cervical vertebra. When you see the pia mater, it is a thin, highly vascular membrane that closely invests the spinal cord and continues below the spinal cord as a thin thread-like prolongation that is known as the filum terminale. So next we'll see about the subarachnoid space. So this is the subarachnoid space, that is a space between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater. So this space is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. Above, it is continuous with the subarachnoid space around the brain, and distal to the termination of the spinal cord, the subarachnoid space around the filum terminale becomes roomy, forming a pool of cerebrospinal fluid called lumbar cistern. The lumbar puncture is done at the site to take out the cerebrospinal fluid. Next we'll see about the lumbar puncture. The lumbar puncture is done to withdraw the cerebrospinal fluid for various diagnostic and therapeutic purposes. The puncture should be done well below the termination of the spinal cord, that is at the lower border of L1 vertebra. A horizontal line connecting the highest point of the iliac crest passes through the spine of the fourth lumbar vertebra. Therefore, the interspaces immediately above or below is the landmark which is used for lumbar puncture. The interspinal space between the L3 and L4 is the most preferred site because in this region the subarachnoid space is more roomy and contain only filum terminale and the roots of the lumbar, sacral and coccygeal nerves forming the cauda equina. During the procedure, the spine must be fully flexed. So the patient is either lying on one side or seated so that the interspinal spaces are opened up to their maximum extent and the lower end of the spinal cord is slightly raised. The needle is passed inward and somewhat cranially exactly in the midline. The supraspinous and the intraspinous ligament are traversed and then the dura mater is penetrated. So when it penetrates the dura mater, it gives a distinct way of give way. Occasionally, the root pain is experienced if the roots of the cauda equina are impinged upon, but usually they float clear of the needle. Next, we'll see about the processes of the pia mater. First, we'll study about the filum terminale. Filum terminale is the delicate, glistening white thread-like structure extending from the conus medullaris. So this is the conus medullaris. From there, the extension of the pia mater is known as the filum terminale. And it extends up to the first coccygeal vertebra, the dorsal aspect of the first coccygeal vertebra. So here you can see this glistening white structure, that is the filum terminale. So the filum terminale is about 20 centimeter long and mainly composed of non-nervous fibrous tissue, that is the pia, and few nerve fibers which are considered to be the rudiments of second, third and fourth coccygeal nerves are found embedded in the upper part. The central canal of the spinal cord extends into the upper part of the filum terminal up to 5 mm. The filum terminal consists of two parts, the filum terminal internum and filum terminal externum. The filum terminal internum is about 15 centimeters long and lies within the dural sac. So this is the dural sac. The part which lies within the dural sac is known as the filum terminal internum. The filum terminal externum is about 5 centimeters long and lies outside the dural sac, that is below the level of second sacral vertebra. The next process is the subarachnoid septum. So this is the subarachnoid septum. It is a mid-sagittal fenestrated pile septum which connects the dorsal surface of the spinal cord to the arachnoid mater. The third process is the linea splendens. So this is the linea splendens. The pia gives off the septum into the anterior median fissure. Where this process is given off, the pia mater presents a thickening that is known as the linea splendens. So the next process is the ligamentum denticulatum. So this is the ligamentum denticulatum. These are two transparent ribbon-like bands of pia mater, one on each side, extending laterally between the posterior and the anterior nerve root from the pia mater covering the spinal cord. The lateral margin of each band presents 21 tooth-like processes which pierces the arachnoid mater and attach to the inner surface of the dura mater between the points of emergence of the spinal nerves. The ligamentum denticulata help to anchor the spinal cord in the middle of the subarachnoid space. So in this picture you can see these are the ligamentum denticulatum. So this is the dorsal root and this is the ventral root. So between this root you get the ligamentum denticulatum which extends from the sides of the spinal cord up to the inner surface of the dura mater. And the first teeth of the ligamentum denticulatum lies at the level of the foramen magnum, where the last teeth lies between T12 and L1 spinal nerves. Next we'll see about the clinical significance of the ligamentum denticulata. It serves as a guide to the neurosurgeon during cordotomy operation. When the sensory tract requires section to relieve pain, the knife is put in front of the ligament, and if the section of the motor tract, that is the pyramidal tract, is desired, the knife is placed behind the ligament. The lowest teeth, so this is the lowest teeth, this forms like a fork. The posterior root of the first lumbar nerve lies on the outer prong of the fork. So in the lower region of the spinal cord, it is the surgeon's guide to the first lumbar nerve and gives him a nerve root of known number from which he can determine the position of whatever nerve root he is in search of. Next we'll see about the external features of the spinal cord. So first we'll study about the fissures and sulci. This is the anterior aspect of the spinal cord and this is the posterior aspect of the spinal cord. The anterior aspect of the spinal cord presents an anterior median fissure. So this is the anterior median fissure and you have two anterolateral sulci. So this is fissure and this is sulci. So anterior median fissure, anterolateral sulci on either side. And on posterior aspect, you have the posteromedian sulcus. So this is the posteromedian sulcus, and then you have two posterolateral sulcus and two postero-intermediate sulcus. The anterior median fissure is deep and extends along the entire length of the spinal cord, and the anterior spinal artery runs in it. The posterior median sulcus is a faint longitudinal groove. From its floor, a septum of neuroglial tissue, that is the posterior median septum, extend into the substance of the cord to a variable extent. The surface of the cord is divided into two symmetrical halves by an anterior median fissure and posterior median sulcus. Each half of the sulcus is further subdivided into posterior, lateral and anterior region by anterolateral, posterolateral and postero-intermediate sulci. Through the anterolateral sulcus emerges the ventral root of the spinal nerve, and through the posterolateral sulcus enters the dorsal root fibers of the spinal nerves. Next we'll see about the attachment of the spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves emerges from the sides of the cords. Of these, 8 are cervical, so 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar and 1 coccygeal. The cervical nerve leaves the vertebral canal above the corresponding vertebra. With the exceptions of the 8th cervical nerve, it emerges between the 7th cervical vertebra and the 1st thoracic vertebra. The remainder of the spinal nerve emerges below the corresponding vertebrae. Each spinal nerve is attached to the spinal cord by two roots, an anterior root which is motor and a posterior root which is sensory. The posterior root has a ganglion that is known as the posterior root ganglion, which consists of pseudo-unipolar cells. Each of the two roots is made up of number of rootlets. So these are the rootlets that arises from the spinal cord over a certain length. The rootlets of the posterior root enters the dorsolateral aspect of the cord along the posterolateral sulcus, whereas the rootlets of the anterior root emerges through the anterolateral sulcus or the anterolateral aspect of the cord opposite to the anterior gray column. Next we'll see about the spinal segments. Like the vertebral column, the spinal cord is also segmented, though the segments are not visible externally. The part of the spinal cord which gives attachment to a pair of spinal nerve, the right and the left pair of spinal nerve, is known as the spinal segment. When you see the number of spinal segment, it is made up of 31 spinal segment. So you have 8 cervical segments, 12 thoracic segment, 5 lumbar segment and 1 coccygeal segment. So when you see, so this is the spinal cord. The length of the spinal cord is smaller and it is about 45 centimeter, and the length of the vertebral column is about 65 centimeter. So the length of the spinal cord is smaller than the length of the vertebral column. And the spinal segments are short and crowded, especially in the lower part of the spinal cord. Hence, the vertebral spines does not correspond with the spinal level. The spinal segments as a rule always lie above their numerically corresponding vertebral spines. In the lower part of the spinal cord, they lie well above the corresponding vertebrae. For example, the lumbar segment are related to the thoracic vertebrae. Next we'll see about the approximate vertebral level of the spinal cord segments. In the upper cervical region, the spinal segments and the vertebral level lie at the same level. In the lower cervical region, the spinal segment lies one vertebra above. That is, the C6 segments lie at the level of C5 vertebra. In the upper thoracic region, the spinal segments lie 2 vertebrae above. That is, the T5 spinal segment lie at the level of third thoracic vertebra. In the lower thoracic region, the spinal segments lie 3 vertebrae above. That is, the T10 spinal segments lie at the level of 7th thoracic vertebra. In the lumbar region, the spinal segments lie 3 to 5 vertebrae above. That is, the L1 to L5 spinal segments lie at the level of 10th thoracic and the 11th thoracic vertebra. And the sacral and the coccygeal spinal segments lie 6 to 10 vertebrae above. That is, at the S1 to coccygeal 1 spinal segment corresponds with 12th thoracic and the first lumbar vertebra. So these levels, although not strictly accurate, it gives a reliable assessment of the level of cord compression following an injury or disease of the surrounding vertebrae. The approximate relationship helps in understanding the consequences of the spinal injuries and the clinical findings of motor and sensory level. They also help in planning for surgical approach for diagnostic and therapeutic purposes. Next we'll see about the enlargements. So the spinal cord is roughly cylindrical in shape with an average diameter of 1.25 centimeter. However, opposite to the attachment of the nerve roots contributing to the formation of brachial and the lumbosacral plexus, the spinal cord presents a fusiform swelling which are known as the cervical and the lumbar enlargements. These enlargements are produced due to the presence of large number of large motor neurons in this region to supply the musculatures of the upper and the lower limb and associated girdles. The cervical enlargement extends from C5 to T1 spinal segments, whereas the lumbar enlargement extends from L2 to S3 spinal segments. The vertebral level of these enlargements are quite different from those of the spinal segments. The cervical enlargement lies opposite to third cervical to first thoracic vertebrae, and the lumbar enlargement lies opposite to 9th thoracic and the first lumbar vertebrae. So once again we'll see, so this is the cervical enlargement which extends from C5 to T1 spinal segment, and this corresponds to third cervical to first thoracic vertebrae, and it is about 38 millimeter at the level of C6 segment, and it supplies the muscles of the upper limb and their associated girdle. When you see the lumbar enlargement, it is from L2 to S3 spinal segments and lies at the level of 9th thoracic to first lumbar vertebrae, and it is about 35 millimeter at the level of S1 segment, and it supplies the muscles of the lower limb and their associated girdle. Next we'll see about the cauda equina. Since the spinal cord is shorter than that of the vertebral column, the length and the obliquity of the spinal nerve increases progressively from above downwards, so that the spinal nerve emerges through the corresponding intervertebral foramina. As a result, the nerve roots of lumbar, except the first one, and the sacral and the coccygeal nerve from the caudal part of the spinal cord, that is the conus medullaris. These nerve roots, when you see, it takes more or less a vertical course and form a bunch of nerve fibers around the filum terminale, and it is known as the cauda equina because it resembles the tail of the horse. The cauda equina consists of the roots of lower 4 lumbar, 5 pairs of sacral and 1 pair of coccygeal nerve. So here you can see this is the cauda equina and this is the conus medullaris and this is the filum terminale. Next we'll see about the cauda equina syndrome. It occurs due to the compression of the cauda equina by an extradural tumor or prolapsed intervertebral disc or spinal canal stenosis. The characteristic features are areflexic lower motor neuron type of paralysis, saddle-shaped anesthesia, severe root pain, late urinary and bowel retention,